Close your eyes and picture a world far removed from the filtered taps and gleaming bottles we take for granted today. Imagine stone-paved streets, damp with rain, torches flickering against timbered walls, and the quiet murmur of voices drifting from a dimly lit tavern. This was the medieval world, a place of faith and fear, scarcity and abundance, survival and celebration. In this age, what people chose to drink was never just about quenching thirst. It was about health, belief, class, ritual, and sometimes sheer desperation. The cup you raised to your lips in the 14th century could be a source of nourishment or of danger. For the people of medieval Europe, drinking was more than a daily habit. It was a delicate balance between necessity and risk. Water, the simplest and most abundant drink, was often unsafe. Wells were easily contaminated, rivers carried waste, and stagnant cisterns bred unseen dangers. To drink plain water could mean illness, even death, and so society turned to alternatives, crafting strange brews and concoctions that today might seem unthinkable. But for them, these drinks were life itself. Step into the smoky air of a village inn. The wooden door creaks as it opens, and the aroma of bread, roasted meat, and fermented drink wafts out. Peasants huddle by the fire, children sip from small wooden cups, and weary travelers share mugs passed from hand to hand. These were not luxuries, they were the very fabric of survival. Beer, ale, mead, spiced wines, vinegar tonics, and curdled dairy brews filled their tables. Some were nourishing, others revolting, and a few carried an almost mythical aura. Each drink told a story of trade, of medicine, of faith, of the endless human search for meaning and comfort. The medieval world of drink was defined by contrast. On one hand, the rich sipped claret, flavored with exotic spices, brought from the East, their golden goblets catching the glow of candlelight in great halls. On the other, the poor survived on small beer, thin, weak, but safer than water. In monasteries, monks brewed careful tonics, treating drink as both science and devotion. In farms and fields, shepherds poured buttermilk and whey, humble liquids that fueled long hours of labor. From grand banquets to peasant huts, the liquid landscape of the Middle Ages was as diverse as it was peculiar. But beyond survival, these drinks carried weighty symbolism. Mead, golden and sweet, was bound to ideas of poetry and divinity. Vinegar brews were believed to purify body and soul. Broths mixed with blood, though unsettling to us, were considered strengthening in times of scarcity. And early whispers of coffee, tea and chocolate drifted across Europe, like promises of another world. Each drink was more than taste, it was meaning, memory, and myth contained in a cup. Now imagine yourself seated at a wooden table, candlelight flickering, shadows dancing along stone walls. A jug is placed before you. What does it contain? Is it a frothy ale brewed just hours ago? A sour vinegar tonic prescribed by a healer? A sweetened spiced wine, poured in celebration? You lift it slowly, uncertain of the flavor, uncertain of its safety, uncertain of the story it will tell. This was the experience of every medieval drinker, curiosity mingled with caution, necessity colored by tradition. To modern ears, these beverages may sound bizarre. Why drink soured milk when fresh was available? Why mix vinegar with honey, or blood with broth? Why let beer replace water at every meal? But to truly understand, we must set aside our assumptions and step into their shoes. Imagine winters so harsh that food spoiled quickly, summers when clean water was scarce, and illnesses with no clear cures. Every sip was a choice, shaped by environment, by need, by culture. What seems strange to us was for them entirely rational and often essential. This journey we are about to take is not simply a list of odd recipes or forgotten customs. It is a walk through the heartbeat of a civilization. Each drink reveals something intimate about the medieval mind, their hopes for healing, their fears of disease, their longing for celebration, their belief that even in the most ordinary act, drinking, there was mystery, ritual, and perhaps even divine protection. We will move slowly, one cup at a time, through taverns and monasteries, farms and feasts. We will meet weary farmers, starting their day with weak ale, nobles indulging in perfumed wines, monks pouring medicinal tonics, and villagers swallowing bitter brews to ward off sickness. Along the way, we will uncover drinks that surprise, amuse, or even unsettle. Yet each will remind us that history is not only written in battles or kings, but in the everyday rhythms of survival, in the cups raised, the throats soothed, and the toasts exchanged across centuries. This is a story about more than beverages. It is about the human spirit, forever seeking safety, comfort, joy, and meaning. The medieval cup was a vessel of culture, carrying with it the fears of contamination, the promise of health, the warmth of community, and the shadows of superstition. And as we explore these strange drinks, we will find that they still echo in the glasses we lift today. So settle in, let your imagination drift into the candlelit taverns and hushed monasteries of long ago. Hear the clinking of wooden mugs, the laughter at feasts, the murmured prayers over bitter tonics. The medieval world is calling, not through battles or crowns, but through the simple act of drinking. And what a strange, wondrous, and unforgettable world of drinks it will reveal. When we think of water today, we imagine it as the simplest, safest, and most essential of drinks. We fill glasses straight from the tap, trusting invisible systems of purification. We carry bottles that promise freshness and clarity, expecting every sip to nourish rather than harm. Yet, in the medieval world, water was not a symbol of purity. It was a gamble, one that could cost a life. To raise a cup of water in the Middle Ages was not an act of refreshment, but one of quiet risk. The reason was simple: contamination. Medieval towns and villages rarely separated clean and dirty water sources. Wells, dug deep into the earth, could be easily tainted by waste from nearby cesspits. Rainwater that collected in barrels quickly grew stagnant, breeding invisible dangers. Rivers and streams, which shimmered so peacefully under the sun, often carried filth, washing from streets, refuse from households, and waste from animals. There was little understanding of bacteria, parasites, or microscopic threats. Illness seemed to appear without warning, but the cause so often was the very water people depended on. Imagine a bustling medieval town. Narrow lanes twist between timber houses, livestock roams freely, chickens pecking at the mud, pigs rooting through discarded scraps. Waste is tossed from windows, pooling in gutters. The marketplace smells of fish, meat, and damp straw, and through the center runs a stream, at first glance refreshing, glistening in the daylight. Yet into it flow the refuse of homes, the blood of butchers, the waste of animals. For the thirsty villager, dipping a wooden cup into this stream may feel natural, even necessary. But to drink from it was to risk fever, dysentery, or worse. Water was not absent from medieval life. It was everywhere. People washed in it, bathed in rivers, used it to cook and clean. But drinking it straight, in many places, was a last resort. Chroniclers tell of outbreaks of bloody flux, fevers that spread through communities, and strange stomach illnesses that baffled healers. Behind many of these mysterious afflictions was the hidden danger in a sip of water. This is why medieval societies developed a deep suspicion of drinking water on its own. When people did consume it, it was often boiled first, infused with herbs, or mixed with something acidic, like vinegar, in the hope of making it safer. But more often, they turned to alternatives: weak ale, small beer, fermented whey, or diluted wine. These drinks contained alcohol or acid that killed bacteria, making them far less dangerous than untreated water. It is no coincidence that entire cultures built their daily diets around beverages we would today consider unusual. The distrust of water also created sharp contrasts between the wealthy and the poor. Nobles in castles had access to carefully protected wells or springs, sometimes even aqueducts brought in from the countryside. Their water sources were watched and maintained, reserved for the privileged. For common folk, however, water was what could be found nearby, and nearby rarely meant clean. The divide between safety and sickness often mirrored the divide between wealth and poverty, yet there were exceptions. In certain regions, springs were regarded as sacred. People believed such waters carried healing powers, blessed by saints or guarded by spirits. Pilgrims would travel miles to sip from a holy well, convinced of its purity. These places became entwined with both health and faith, where drinking water was not only safe, but spiritual. Even so, such sanctuaries were rare, and for most daily water remained a source of anxiety. Consider for a moment a medieval mother preparing a meal for her family. She has a choice. She can pour water into the pot, or she can use weak ale left from brewing. The ale is safer, its fermentation protecting her children from illness. The water, though abundant, carries uncertainty. She chooses ale not for pleasure, but for survival. This quiet decision, repeated countless times across centuries, shaped the very rhythm of medieval diets. The risks of water also influenced medicine. Healers frequently warned against drinking cold, raw water. They believed it upset the humors, chilling the stomach and weakening the body. Instead, water was boiled into herbal infusions, or prescribed with vinegar to cut its heaviness. The medieval medical system, though misunderstood by modern science, often reflected lived experience. Drinking untreated water did make people sick, so the advice to avoid it was not without merit. Even travelers carried this caution with them. Accounts from pilgrims on the road to Canterbury, or merchants crossing Europe, often mention stopping not for water but for ale or wine. In cities, travelers would pay for diluted wine, known as posset or posca, rather than risk drawing from a communal well. The movement of people across regions spread both beverages and the cultural habit of distrusting water. And yet, despite all these dangers, water never disappeared entirely from the medieval cup. It was still used when nothing else could be found, when poverty forced the choice, or in times of extreme thirst. People may have feared it, but they could never escape it. In moments of drought or scarcity, even the most suspicious villagers lifted water to their lips, whispering prayers that it would do no harm. The story of medieval water is not just about illness. It is also about resilience and adaptation. Without scientific knowledge, people found ways to protect themselves, to make their environment safer through custom and ritual. Fermentation, dilution, boiling, these became cultural solutions, born not of laboratories, but of lived necessity. Every strange drink we will encounter on this journey, from small beer to vinegar tonics, traces back to this fundamental problem: water could not be trusted. For us today, the idea feels almost unimaginable. We expect water to be the purest drink of all. But for medieval people, purity belonged to wine, beer, or mead. Water was the wild element, unpredictable, dangerous, untamed. It stood as a reminder that life itself, even in its most basic form, was uncertain. So as we leave behind this chapter of water and its perils, we begin to understand why the Middle Ages were a world of strange drinks. Every unusual brew we will explore, from sour milk to spiced wine, was born from necessity, shaped by the gamble of water. The medieval cup was filled with creativity, with adaptation, and with survival. And at the heart of it all was this simple truth: the clearest drink of all was often the most dangerous. Step now into a medieval village at dawn. The sky is pale grey, the mist still clinging to the fields, and the day's labour has not yet begun. In a small cottage, a farmer sits at the table, his hands rough with work, his children rubbing sleep from their eyes. Before them rests not a jug of milk, nor a pot of water, but mugs of frothy, amber-coloured liquid. It is ale, weak, nourishing, and familiar. This is breakfast. In the Middle Ages, beer was not a luxury, but a daily necessity, as vital as bread. Why did people drink beer so frequently? Because it was safe. The brewing process, with its boiling and fermentation, killed harmful microbes that water carried. Even at its weakest, beer provided a measure of protection against illness. But beyond safety, it also offered calories, nourishment, and comfort. It became the drink of every household, consumed by men, women, and children alike. Today, the idea of children sipping beer feels shocking, but in the medieval mind, there was no contradiction. Weak beer, often called small beer, contained only a trace of alcohol, enough to purify, not enough to intoxicate. It was food, hydration, and medicine in one. The brewing of ale was as common in medieval homes as baking bread. Every village had women who brewed for their families, and often for their neighbours. They were known as alewives, their craft passed from mother to daughter, their recipes adapted to local grains and traditions. Picture an alewife at work, stirring a wooden vat, the air rich with the earthy scent of malt, steam rising as water meets barley. The bubbling liquid was part science, part ritual, each stage observed with care. For many households, brewing was not just practical, it was a skill that defined survival. In towns and cities, brewing grew larger, taverns and inns became centers of community, their benches crowded with workers sharing a pint after a long day. Monasteries too perfected the art, turning beer into an industry. Monks brewed not only for their own consumption, but for sale, funding their abbeys and earning reputations for quality. A jug of monastic ale could be both a source of sustenance and a symbol of spiritual order. The connection between religion and brewing was strong. To drink beer was to partake in the balance of body and soul, nourishment and moderation. The taste of medieval beer, however, was different from what we know today. Hops, which give modern beer its sharp, bitter edge, were not widely used until later centuries. Instead, brewers flavored their ales with mixtures of herbs and spices called grüt. Yarrow, mugwort, and rosemary gave drinks an earthy, sometimes bitter, sometimes aromatic flavor. Each region had its own combinations, and each brew carried a local identity. To sip ale in one town was to taste its soil, its herbs, its traditions. Small beer, the everyday drink, was weaker still. It was brewed from the second or even third use of grains, its alcohol content so low that a person could drink it all day without stumbling. Children carried mugs of it to school, laborers drank it in the fields. It quenched thirst, filled the belly, and carried less risk than water. For peasants, it was as essential as bread or porridge. In this sense, small beer was not indulgence but survival, yet beer was also social. Imagine a crowded tavern in the heart of a medieval town. The air is thick with smoke from the fire, voices rise in laughter and song, and mugs clink together in countless toasts. Beer flowed not only in cottages, but in these communal halls, where it lubricated conversation, soothed weariness, and bound people together. To drink ale was to belong to your family, your village, your guild, your community. For the wealthy, beer held a different place. Nobles often preferred wine, imported at great expense from southern regions. But even in castles, beer appeared at the table, especially when wine was scarce. The difference lay in quality. The nobility had access to stronger, better brewed ales, sometimes spiced with costly ingredients. A golden goblet of richly flavored ale in a great hall carried far more prestige than the thin small beer in a peasant's mug, yet both were linked by necessity. The role of beer also touched medicine. Physicians sometimes prescribed ale, infused with herbs as remedies for ailments. A bitter beer might be recommended for digestion, a sweeter one for strength. Recipes for medicinal brews blurred the line between drink and cure, another reminder of how central beer was to medieval life. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of beer in the Middle Ages was its universality. It was the drink of kings and beggars, monks and soldiers, farmers and merchants. It crossed every social boundary, adapting in strength, flavor and ritual to fit its context. In monasteries, it was part of prayer. In taverns, it was part of joy. In fields, it was part of labor. In kitchens, it was part of daily bread. Few other drinks carried such breadth of meaning, and there was something comforting in its familiarity. In a world of uncertainty, illness, famine, war, beer was reliable. It was there in the morning, there in the evening, there at birth and at funerals. It marked the ordinary rhythms of life as much as the extraordinary moments of celebration. For medieval people, to drink beer was not only to quench thirst, but to connect with a shared heritage, one that stretched across villages and generations. To modern minds, this may seem peculiar. We think of beer as an indulgence, an evening relaxation, or a symbol of festivity. But for the medieval world, it was far more. It was survival, community, and continuity. And when we look closely, we realize that the habit of replacing water with beer shaped entire cultures. It influenced health, economy, and even spirituality. So as we place down our mug of small beer and leave the warmth of the tavern, we carry with us a clearer picture of medieval life. Every sip of beer was a choice against the dangers of water, a nod to tradition, a gesture of belonging, and though strange to us today, it made perfect sense to them. Beer was not the exception, it was the rule, and it is this rule, born of necessity, that opens the door to the stranger drinks still to come. For if beer could become bread in liquid form, what other concoctions, however odd, might have served the same purpose? The medieval world had many more curious brews to offer, and each one tells its own unforgettable story. Close your eyes and imagine a small, narrow shop tucked along a cobblestone street. The door creaks as it opens, releasing a swirl of scents, bitter herbs, dried flowers, oils steeped in glass jars. Candles flicker against shelves, lined with vials, powders, and bundles of plants, hung to dry. This is the workshop of a medieval apothecary, a place where medicine was brewed, not in tablets or capsules, but in cups, bowls, and flagons. In this world, to be healed was often to drink. The medieval mind understood illness through a very different lens than our own. Physicians believed in the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance between them. Sickness meant imbalance. A remedy was designed to restore harmony, often by opposing the quality of the illness. If you suffered from a cold disease, you were given something hot, spices, wine, or heated broths. If your body was too dry, you drank something moist, like honey, water, or milk. In this way, beverages became not only nourishment, but prescriptions for the soul and body alike. Many of these medicinal brews were bitter, unpleasant to taste, but their power was believed to lie in their sharpness. Vinegar was a frequent ingredient, thought to cut through impurities. Honey balanced bitterness with sweetness, believed to soothe the throat and strengthen the chest. Herbs like sage, thyme, fennel, and rosemary were steeped into infusions, drunk as tonics for fevers or weakness. A person with stomach pains might be given wormwood steeped in ale. Someone with melancholy might sip a sweetened claret, infused with cinnamon and ginger. These recipes blurred the line between kitchen and pharmacy, where health was swallowed in every gulp. Some remedies were more bizarre. In certain manuals, ground pearls were dissolved in liquid, thought to restore vitality. Gold dust mixed into wine was prescribed for the wealthy, believed to strengthen the heart and preserve youth. Other brews included powdered antlers, animal fat boiled into broths, or even concoctions made with animal blood. To modern ears, these drinks sound unsettling, yet they reflected a belief that nature's strength could be consumed and transferred. Every element of the natural world, from the flower in a meadow to the horn of a deer, might be transformed into a healing cup. Medicinal drinks were not confined to physicians and apothecaries. Monks living in monasteries became masters of herbal knowledge. In their cloistered gardens, they cultivated lavender, mint, chamomile, and valerian. These plants were carefully dried and brewed into infusions that calmed the sick or soothed the weary traveler seeking shelter at the abbey gates. To sip from a monk's wooden bowl was to taste centuries of tradition, an unbroken line of care that saw no difference between prayer, medicine, and drink. Imagine a scene: a monk in a long brown habit stands at a wooden bench, grinding herbs with a stone mortar. He pours boiling water over them, the steam rising in fragrant clouds. The resulting brew is poured into a clay cup and handed to a coughing traveler. The man sips slowly, his body warmed, his spirit comforted. Whether or not the drink cures his illness, it offers him solace, a reminder that he is cared for. In this sense, medicinal drinks were never only physical cures, they were rituals of compassion. Another class of beverages blurred the line between medicine and indulgence. Spiced wines, such as hippocrates, were believed to open the stomach and lighten the mood. To sip them was to encourage digestion after a heavy meal, but also to lift the spirits. These brews often included expensive ingredients: nutmeg, cloves, ginger, carried along trade routes from distant lands. Thus they became both symbols of wealth and instruments of healing. To drink them was to taste not only health, but the promise of exotic worlds. Even everyday drinks were given medicinal framing. Ale brewed with herbs could be described as a tonic. Milk warmed with honey was thought to ease sleeplessness. Vinegar mixed with water and herbs became a cleansing potion. In this way, the medieval person never drank without also thinking of health. The line between pleasure and prescription was faint, if it existed at all. But behind these concoctions lay uncertainty. For every successful remedy, there were failures. Some patients grew worse, their humors disturbed rather than soothed. Others endured potions so bitter, they could hardly swallow them. And yet, people returned again and again to these cures, because the act of drinking offered hope. A bitter tonic might taste foul, but it gave the sufferer a sense of action, a feeling that something was being done against the mystery of illness. One of the most fascinating aspects of these brews was their ritual. To prepare a medicinal drink was not a casual act. Ingredients were measured with care, often under prayer or incantation. Some healers believed the timing of the moon or the blessing of a saint added strength to the potion. The act of stirring, pouring and serving was layered with symbolism, turning the drink into something greater than liquid in a cup. It became a ceremony of healing, a bridge between faith and medicine. Of course, not all such brews were benign. Some were dangerous, their ingredients toxic in ways medieval healers did not understand. Lead cups leached poison into wine. Mercury, once thought to cure ailments, caused harm. Yet these mistakes did not erase the deep trust people placed in their drinks. To them, the world itself was a pharmacy, every plant and mineral waiting to be transformed into a cure. To drink was to participate in nature's power. What strikes us today, as we look back, is the intimacy of these practices. Imagine sipping from a warm wooden cup, knowing the herbs were gathered by hand, the honey stirred slowly, the brew whispered over in prayer. Every swallow carried the touch of the earth, the hand of the healer, the hope of the patient. Even if the illness remained, the drink itself was an experience of care. And so medicinal brews remind us that in the Middle Ages, health was not just fought in battlefields of the body, but in the cups held gently to the lips. Every bitter tonic, every sweet infusion, every strange concoction was an attempt to bring harmony where there was imbalance, comfort where there was pain. These drinks reveal a world where survival required imagination, where even the most unusual recipes were born of necessity, and where healing was as much about ritual as it was about remedy. As we set down the apothecary's cup and leave the flickering light of his shop behind, we carry with us a deeper understanding of medieval life. To them, the cup was never empty. It was filled with meaning of nature, of faith, of hope. And from this world of cures in a cup, we move onward toward drinks of myth and ritual, where honey and poetry mingled, and where the simple act of drinking touched the realm of legend. Picture a long wooden hall, its beams darkened by smoke, the air thick with the mingled scents of roasted meat and burning firewood. At the center, torches flicker, casting shadows on shields and tapestries. Men and women sit shoulder to shoulder on benches, their laughter echoing, their voices raised in song. At the head of the hall, a great horn-shaped vessel is lifted high, golden liquid shimmering within. This is mead, the drink of honey, of poetry, of myth. In the medieval imagination, it was not just a beverage, it was a symbol, a ritual, an obsession. Mead is one of the oldest alcoholic drinks known to humanity, older even than beer or wine. At its heart, it is simple: honey, water, and fermentation. But to the medieval mind, it was anything but ordinary. Honey itself carried sacred associations. It was the sweetness of the earth, a gift from bees, creatures often linked to purity and divine order. To drink mead was, in a sense, to drink the distilled essence of nature's sweetness. Among the Norse and Germanic peoples, mead held a place of reverence. It was bound to myth, the mead of poetry, a legendary drink said to grant wisdom and inspiration to whoever tasted it. Warriors gathered in great halls believed that in Valhalla itself, endless mead would flow for those who died bravely in battle. These associations made mead not just nourishment, but a bridge between the mortal and the divine. To sip from a horn of mead was to feel, however briefly, that one touched the realm of gods and heroes. In more practical life, mead was both a celebratory and medicinal drink. Weddings often featured a honeymoon period, named for the tradition of giving newlyweds mead to promote fertility and happiness. A cup of honey wine symbolized sweetness in life, just as it did in taste. Physicians too prescribed mead, mixed with herbs, for ailments of the chest or stomach. It was thought to warm the body, to open the heart, and to heal melancholy. Thus the drink straddled both joy and cure, woven into daily life and sacred occasion alike. The making of mead was an art, Imagine a beekeeper carefully tending hives in a meadow, the buzz of bees filling the air. The honey collected was precious, not only as food, but as the foundation of a drink that could last months, even years, if aged. Honey was mixed with water in great vats, sometimes flavored with herbs, spices or fruits, then left to ferment. The result varied. Some meads were light and sweet, others strong and heady. Each household, each monastery, each hall had its own recipes, and no two brews were quite the same. For the wealthy, mead could be an indulgence, flavored with saffron, cinnamon or exotic imports from distant lands. For peasants it was often simpler, brewed with herbs from the fields or fruits from nearby orchards. Yet across classes, it carried a special aura. Unlike beer, which was daily sustenance, or wine, which was often imported, mead felt closer to the earth itself. It was drawn from bees, creatures that worked tirelessly through summer to create their golden treasure. To drink mead was to partake in a gift of the natural world. In monasteries, mead also had a place. Monks brewed it not only for their own consumption, but as part of their charitable work, offering it to travelers or the sick. The sweetness of honey was thought to restore strength to the weary. In this way, mead became not only a drink of feasts, but also a drink of healing and welcome. And yet, mead also symbolized something fleeting. Honey was not as abundant as grain, and so mead was rarer than beer. It was reserved for special occasions, for moments of joy or solemnity. To drink mead was to mark time, to note a wedding, a festival, a victory, a sacred day. In a world where daily life was harsh and uncertain, mead stood apart as a reminder of celebration, a pause in the grind of survival. The flavor of mead too set it apart. Imagine raising a wooden cup to your lips, the liquid golden, its center mingling of flowers and earth. The first taste is sweet, but not in the simple way of sugar. It carries depth, a complexity shaped by the blossoms the bees visited. Some meads were sharp, some mellow, some tinged with herbs or spices, but all carried that echo of honey, a richness unlike any other drink of the age. It is no wonder it became bound to poetry, myth, and memory, even as wine gained prominence through trade, and beer became the daily bread of drink. Mead lingered in the imagination. It was more than nourishment, it was story. Ballads and sagas spoke of heroes lifting horns of mead, of brides sipping honey wine, of kings rewarding warriors with golden cups. The drink itself became a symbol of fellowship, of community, of shared destiny. To drink mead was to take part in a tradition larger than oneself. Over time, mead's popularity waned, overshadowed by the abundance of beer and the prestige of wine. But in the medieval centuries, it occupied a space no other beverage could quite replace. It was the drink of myth, medicine, marriage, and memory. To call it an obsession is no exaggeration, for it tied together the threads of life, faith, and celebration. And so when we picture the medieval world of drink, we must always pause at the image of the mead hall, torches glowing, voices raised in song, golden liquid poured and passed, each cup carrying with it the sweetness of honey and the weight of tradition. Mead was not just a drink, it was a promise of joy, of healing, of inspiration. And in every golden drop, medieval people tasted not only the labor of bees, but the hope of something greater than themselves. Imagine a hot summer day in medieval Europe. The air is heavy with dust, the sun burns down on crowded streets, and fresh water, even if found, might carry unseen dangers. In such a world, one of the most common drinks to quench thirst was not sweet, not rich, but sharp, sour, and startling to the tongue vinegar-based beverages. To modern ears, it sounds almost punishing, but to the medieval mind, vinegar drinks were practical, refreshing, and sometimes even life-saving. At its heart was a concoction known as posca or oxymel, depending on where and how it was prepared. These were simple mixtures, vinegar, water, and sometimes honey or herbs. The sourness may seem unpleasant, yet it masked the taste of unsafe water, and the acidity killed off harmful microbes. In a time before germ theory, people still observed that sour drinks were safer. To drink plain river water was a gamble. To drink vinegar mixed with water was often far less risky. The Romans had used posca as the drink of soldiers and common folk, and the tradition carried into the medieval centuries. Soldiers marching long distances, peasants laboring in the fields, and even monks in their cloisters drank variations of these vinegar beverages. The sharp tang not only refreshed but revived, cutting through thirst in a way plain liquid often could not. In this sense, vinegar drinks were both protection and relief. One of the most common versions was oxymel, a mixture of honey and vinegar diluted in water. Physicians recommended it as a cure for sore throats, coughs, and fevers. Honey softened the harsh acidity, creating a balance of sweet and sour that was believed to cleanse the body. To drink oxymel was thought to cool the blood, to settle the stomach, and to restore balance to the humors. The medieval medical world, grounded in humoral theory, saw vinegar as cooling and drying, the opposite of heat and moisture that might cause illness. In this framework, vinegar was not punishment, but remedy. And yet, for those unaccustomed to the sharpness, such drinks could feel more like a challenge than comfort. Imagine a weary peasant lifting a wooden cup to their lips, the liquid biting at the tongue, the throat tightening as the sourness surged. For some, it was invigorating, like a jolt of wakefulness. For others, it was harsh, even unpleasant. But in the absence of cleaner options, vinegar drinks were often the wiser choice. The social meaning of vinegar beverages was also complex. They were not drinks of wealth or indulgence like spiced wines or honeyed meads. They belonged to the working classes, to soldiers, farmers, and laborers. To drink vinegar was to accept necessity. And yet, there was dignity in that necessity, for these drinks kept people alive and healthy. They were survival in a cup. In monasteries, vinegar-based drinks were also part of discipline. Monks practiced moderation, and luxurious drinks were frowned upon. A simple mixture of vinegar and water was humble, refreshing, and aligned with ideals of ascetic life. Some records even suggest that monastic communities saw vinegar drinks as spiritually cleansing, a way to purify not only the body, but the soul. The sourness was a reminder of sacrifice, a contrast to the sweetness of worldly pleasures. There were also more elaborate versions of vinegar beverages. Herbs like mint, rosemary, or sage could be steeped in the mixture, creating drinks that were both medicinal and aromatic. Sometimes fruit juices were added, creating an early form of shrub or cordial. These additions softened the sharpness and made the drink more palatable, especially for children or the sick. What began as survival necessity could become, in skilled hands, a kind of art. The duality of vinegar drinks, healthful yet harsh, humble yet vital, gave them a strange place in medieval culture. They were never celebrated in song or story, as mead or ale were. No bard raised a toast to oxymel. And yet, behind the scenes, they played an essential role. They were the unacknowledged guardians of health, the quiet remedy on the table. Without them, disease might have spread more quickly, thirst might have claimed more lives. Even the wealthy, despite having access to wine and exotic spices, sometimes turned to vinegar beverages. After rich feasts, vinegar was thought to aid digestion, to cut through the heaviness of meat and fat. Physicians advised noble households to keep oxymel on hand for balance. So while peasants drank vinegar out of necessity, lords and ladies sometimes drank it out of wisdom. Perhaps the strangest aspect to modern ears is how vinegar came to represent both punishment and health. Some medieval penitents deliberately drank sour mixtures as a form of self-denial, a rejection of pleasure. To embrace the bitterness was to embrace humility. For them, vinegar was more than drink. It was symbol, a lesson in spiritual endurance. And yet, when viewed through practical eyes, vinegar was refreshment in disguise. On hot days, a diluted vinegar mixture was crisp and cooling, much like lemonade is to us today. The sourness sharpened the senses, cut through fatigue, and brought a moment of alertness. What might sound unappealing to us was, in fact, a treasured tool of survival and balance. So was it health or punishment? To the medieval drinker, it was both. The sourness could sting, but the benefits were clear. Vinegar drinks were humbling, unglamorous, but reliable. They embodied the medieval struggle itself, harshness intertwined with endurance, survival carved from necessity. As we imagine the grand banquet halls of lords and kings, with golden goblets of wine and mead. We must not forget the other side of the table. There, in simple wooden cups, vinegar mixed with water was passed around among those who worked, prayed, and marched. No feast songs honored it, but it carried its own quiet dignity. In the end, vinegar drinks remind us of the resilience of medieval people, their ability to transform even sourness into sustenance, their capacity to find life in what at first seemed bitterness. To taste that sharp tang was to taste both the hardship and the wisdom of their world, and in its sting they found health, survival, and a strange kind of refreshment. Step now from the modest wooden tables of peasants into the candle-lit halls of nobility. Imagine the difference: the smell of roasting meats, the glimmer of silver platters, the flicker of torchlight against high stone walls. Here, among the wealthy, wine was not merely a drink. It was a stage for display, a symbol of refinement, and often a canvas for creativity. At the very heart of this culture of indulgence was spiced wine, one of the most prized beverages of the medieval age. To the medieval palate, spiced wine represented sophistication. While ordinary ale, or watered-down cider, was common among villagers, spiced wine was reserved for those who could afford both the base wine and the costly imports needed to transform it. Spices such as cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and nutmeg traveled long, dangerous trade routes from the east. They were worth their weight in gold, guarded by merchants, and treasured by the kitchens of the wealthy. To own spices was to hold status, to pour them into wine was to flaunt it. The preparation of spiced wine was deliberate and ceremonial. Recipes varied across regions, but most involved gently heating red or white wine, then adding a mixture of crushed spices, honey, and sometimes fruit. The result was aromatic, warming, and deeply flavorful. Known in some areas as hippocras, after the ancient physician Hippocrates, spiced wine was believed to carry medicinal as well as social value. It soothed the stomach, enlivened the senses, and eased the heavy digestion of feasts rich with meat and bread. Picture a banquet in a great hall, the noise of laughter, the echo of music, the clatter of goblets. At the end of such a meal, servants would bring forward pitchers of hippocras. Guests would sip slowly, savoring the sweetness and the warmth, the spice mingling with the wine to create a flavor far removed from the harshness of everyday drinks. It was more than refreshment. It was an experience of delight, a sign that the host possessed both wealth and taste. But spiced wine was not only about flavor, it was about meaning. In medieval culture, wine itself carried connotations of divine blessing, tied to the symbolism of the Eucharist. To elevate wine further with spices was to elevate not just the drink but the moment, turning an ordinary beverage into something extraordinary. It was celebration in liquid form, a way of saying, here in this hall, life is rich, full, and worthy of joy. For nobles and merchants alike, serving spiced wine was also a declaration of connection to distant worlds. Every sip carried the story of caravans crossing deserts, ships sailing stormy seas, and merchants bargaining in far-off ports. The taste of cinnamon hinted at India, cloves whispered of the Moluccas, nutmeg spoke of journeys through spice islands known to only a few. To sip hippocras was to sip empire, trade, and adventure. It reminded the wealthy that their tables were supplied not only by local farms, but by the very threads of global commerce. Even physicians endorsed spiced wine as beneficial. In an age when health was thought to be a balance of humors, warm and aromatic drinks were prized for their ability to settle the body. Hippocras was prescribed for indigestion, melancholy, or coldness of temperament. Its heat and spice were said to restore vigor, to chase away sluggishness, to brighten the spirits. In this sense, spiced wine bridged pleasure and practicality. To drink it was both indulgence and cure. Of course, the expense ensured that such luxury remained out of reach for most. A peasant might spend a lifetime without tasting a single cup of hippocras. Even among the middling classes, it was reserved for special occasions, weddings, holidays, or religious festivals. At such moments, when a family managed to obtain a bottle, it became a treasure, poured sparingly, shared reverently, remembered long after the cup was empty. There were also variations in recipe and style, depending on region and preference. In France, spiced wines leaned toward heavy use of cinnamon and cloves. In England, Ginger and nutmeg often dominated. Some recipes even included exotic ingredients, like grains of paradise, a peppery seed imported from Africa, or long pepper, spicier than the common black pepper. Each combination created not just a drink, but a signature of culture, wealth and taste. The ritual of serving hippocras also added to its allure. In some courts it was poured through a special cloth bag, a hippocras bag, which filtered out the spices and left a smooth perfumed liquid behind. The very act of preparing it suggested patience, care and refinement. Guests who received a goblet knew they were partaking in something crafted with thought, not hastily poured. Yet there was a paradox to spiced wine. While it dazzled the senses, it also masked the faults of poor quality wines. In medieval Europe, not all wine aged well. Many turned sour quickly, or carried harsh flavors from improper storage. By heating and spicing them, cooks could transform flawed wine into a drink of apparent luxury. Thus even the wealthy, for all their opulence, sometimes relied on spices to cover imperfections. What appeared to be extravagance was also clever disguise. Still the symbolism endured. To be offered spiced wine was to be honored, to be welcomed into the warmth of community and the circle of wealth. For a guest, the aroma of cinnamon and honey was a signal: you are valued here, and no expense has been spared in your presence. Few other drinks carried such layered meaning: luxury, hospitality, medicine, and spectacle, all in one. If vinegar drinks represented survival and necessity, spiced wines represented aspiration and indulgence. One was the drink of endurance, the other the drink of celebration. Together they reflect the contrasts of medieval life: harshness and pleasure, scarcity and abundance, struggle and triumph. As we close our eyes and imagine those feasts, the laughter and warmth of the hall, the glow of torches, the murmur of songs, we can almost taste the hippocras ourselves. Sweet, spiced, golden in the goblet, it carried not just flavor, but the essence of a world reaching outward, dreaming of distant lands, yet always anchored in the communal joy of the table. Spiced wine was more than a drink. It was a story in liquid form of trade and status, of medicine and indulgence, of culture and connection. To raise a goblet of hippocras was to raise a piece of the medieval world itself, sharp, fragrant, fleeting, yet unforgettable. If spiced wines glittered in the banquet halls of nobles, ale and small beer formed the heartbeat of everyday medieval life. These were not luxuries, but necessities, the daily drinks of farmers, craftsmen, children, and even the elderly. To step into a medieval village was to step into a world where water was often unsafe, milk scarce, and wine too costly for the common purse. In this world, ale and small beer became the universal companions of meals, work, and rest. Close your eyes and picture the scene: dawn breaking over a small hamlet, the soft crow of a rooster, the clatter of buckets as women fetch water, the earthy smell of damp soil after a night of mist. In the center of the village, smoke curls upward from hearths. Inside homes, children stir from their straw beds. Before they set off to the fields or workshops, a jug is passed around the table, not of water, but of small beer, light and mild, a safe drink to begin the day. The reason was simple: water carried risks. Without modern filtration, wells could easily be contaminated, streams could carry disease, and stagnant water often harbored illness. By brewing grain into ale or small beer, people transformed questionable water into something safer, thanks to the boiling process and the natural fermentation that followed. Brewing was, in this sense, both survival and routine. Every household, from cottage to castle, relied on it. Ale was the stronger, fuller version, brewed from malted barley, sometimes oats or wheat, with yeast creating a rich, nourishing beverage. Small beer, by contrast, was the lighter second or even third run of the brewing process. Once the grains had been steeped and boiled for ale, they could be reused to produce a weaker brew, far lower in alcohol, but still flavorful and safe to drink. This weaker version became the staple for children, servants, and those needing hydration without intoxication. Imagine the rhythm of the brewer's day. A housewife, for it was often women who brewed, tended the pot set over the fire. She stirred the mash with a wooden paddle, checked its warmth with practiced hands, and strained the liquid through woven cloth. The yeasty scent filled the air, mingling with the smoke of the hearth. Brewing was both domestic labor and skilled craft, passed down through generations and adapted to the resources of each household. In many villages, the alewife was as important as the baker, her product as essential as bread. The taste of ale and small beer varied from place to place. Some were nutty and rich, others thin and sour, depending on the quality of grain, water, and yeast. But they all shared one thing: they were part of the fabric of daily life. A laborer in the fields might drink small beer at midday to refresh himself. A family might gather around a loaf of bread and a pitcher of ale in the evening, ending their day with sustenance in liquid form. Even travelers on the road found solace in taverns, where the sign of a foaming mug promised safety and rest. Taverns and alehouses grew around this universal need. In towns and along trade routes, they became gathering points where villagers shared news, merchants struck bargains, and travelers exchanged stories. To step into an alehouse was to step into the warmth of fellowship. Wooden benches, smoke-darkened beams, the laughter of patrons, the slam of tankards, all of it painted a picture of a world that, though harder than ours, carried its own rhythms of joy. And always at the center, the humble ale, poured and shared. But ale and small beer were not simply about comfort, they were about nutrition. Grains held calories, and in liquid form, they became a source of sustenance, especially in lean seasons. A jug of ale was sometimes described as liquid bread, providing energy to workers who spent long hours in fields or workshops. For children, small beer gave hydration without the dangers of polluted water. It was as necessary as bread itself, woven into the very idea of survival. This dependency on ale carried cultural weight. In England, for example, statutes were created to regulate brewing. Ale conners, officials appointed by towns, were tasked with tasting and inspecting the quality of ale. They ensured that brewers did not water it down excessively or overcharge. Imagine the odd sight: a man kneeling in the street, leather breeches, damp with spilled ale, testing its consistency and price. Such rituals, though amusing to us now, underline just how central ale was to medieval communities. Still, brewing was not uniform. In early medieval times, ale was often brewed without hops, giving it a shorter shelf life and a sweeter flavor. This unhopped ale soured quickly, forcing people to consume it within days. By the late Middle Ages, however, hops began spreading across Europe, introduced from regions like Flanders and Germany. Hopped beer lasted longer, traveled better, and carried a sharper taste. The shift from ale to hopped beer marked not only a change in flavor, but a transformation in commerce and culture. To many, the introduction of hops was controversial. Traditional alewives resisted, claiming that hops made beer bitter and unnatural. Yet merchants and towns favored it, for it could be stored and traded across distances. Slowly the balance shifted, and by the Renaissance, hopped beer began to dominate. But during much of the medieval era, the sweet, perishable ale remained king of daily life. For all its ordinariness, ale could also carry moments of festivity. Stronger batches were brewed for weddings, feasts, or seasonal celebrations. Yule ale warmed the winter halls. Harvest ale celebrated the gathering of grain. In these moments, ale transcended mere necessity and became part of the joy of community, raising spirits as surely as it filled stomachs. Children, too, grew up on small beer, sipping it from wooden cups with meals, their bodies accustomed from a young age to its mild flavor. It was not indulgence, but normality. To them, water was strange and rare. Small beer was everyday life. This might seem peculiar to modern ears, but for centuries, it was the rhythm of growing up, learning to eat bread, to labor in the fields, and to drink small beer alongside one's elders. The duality of ale and small beer reflected the broader contrasts of medieval life. They were simple yet vital, humble yet communal. They lacked the glamour of spiced wine or the exoticism of mead, but they sustained the majority. If you wanted to glimpse the true heartbeat of medieval Europe, you would not look to the banquet halls, but to the pitchers on humble wooden tables, and in those pitchers lay more than refreshment. They carried the story of resilience, of people making safety from danger, nourishment from grain, and fellowship from shared cups. They remind us that history is not only shaped by kings and nobles, but by the quiet persistence of daily life, by the mother brewing small beer at dawn, the farmer raising his mug after toil, the traveler resting in a tavern with strangers. Ale and small beer were not glamorous, they were not rare, yet without them, the medieval world would not have endured. They were the quiet heroes of survival, the steady presence at every table, the bridge between thirst and safety, between hunger and endurance. So when we look back on the strangest drinks of the medieval world, we must also pause to honor the simplest, for in every cup of ale, or small beer, we glimpse not only the taste of a time long gone, but the steady rhythm of lives lived, humble, persistent, enduring, and profoundly human. Among the many drinks of the medieval world, none carries the same aura of myth and legend as mead. Known as the nectar of the gods, mead was more than a beverage. It was a symbol of poetry, magic, and ancient tradition. To sip mead was to sip history itself, a practice older than bread, older than wine, stretching back thousands of years, to when humans first discovered that honey, mixed with water, could ferment into a golden elixir. Picture, if you will, a great timber hall lit by flickering torches. Simid, warriors sit on long benches, their shadows dancing on the walls as firelight glimmers on their helmets. At the head of the hall, a chieftain raises a carved horn, brimming with golden liquid. He drinks deeply, then passes it to his companions. The hall echoes with song, with boasts of valor, with the rhythm of drums and lyres. This is not just a feast, this is ritual, this is mead. Unlike ale or beer, which came from the labor of fields, mead was born from the labor of bees. Honey was precious, gathered with care from hives, hidden in hollow trees, or cultivated in woven skeps. Every drop carried the sweetness of countless flowers, distilled by bees into amber treasure. When mixed with water and left to ferment, it became something greater, a drink smooth yet potent, sweet yet warming, with a flavor unlike any other. Because honey was scarce, mead was rarer than ale, and more precious than wine. For ordinary peasants, mead was a drink tasted only on rare occasions, at weddings, festivals, or sacred rites. For the nobility, it was a mark of refinement, a drink of kings and lords. To hold a cup of mead was to hold a fragment of luxury, an echo of myth. In the old sagas of the Norse, mead was revered as the drink of immortality and wisdom. Skalds sang of the mead of poetry, said to grant divine inspiration to those who drank it. Warriors believed it strengthened courage, while lovers believed it stirred passion. Even in Christian Europe, echoes of this reverence remained. Monasteries brewed mead, alongside ale, offering it to guests and pilgrims as a token of hospitality. In these quiet cloisters, monks tended their bees with patience, harvesting honey, not only for food, but for this golden brew that carried whispers of the past. The making of mead was both simple and artful. Honey, water, and thyme were the essentials, but many variations emerged. Spices could be added: cinnamon, cloves, ginger, or herbs like meadow sweet and rosemary. Fruits might be blended, creating flavors of apple, cherry, or black currant. Strong meads aged for years, mellowing into smoothness. Light meads were drunk young, sweet, and lively. Each batch reflected the resources of its maker, the soil of the land, and the imagination of the brewer. Imagine the taste: a golden sip, first sweet on the tongue, then warming in the throat, leaving behind the faint perfume of flowers. It was not the bitterness of beer, nor the sharpness of wine, but something softer, dreamlike, almost ethereal. No wonder poets and storytellers wove it into their verses. No wonder rulers chose it for ceremonies of honor. To drink mead was to step into a realm halfway between the earthly and the divine. Yet, for all its beauty, mead carried a kind of fragility. Honey was costly to gather, requiring hives, tools, and time. In much of medieval Europe, honey was also a commodity for trade, used in medicines, confections, and candles. The wax-lit churches, the honey-sweetened food. Brewing mead meant using up a treasure that could serve many other purposes. And so mead remained rare, celebrated in song, remembered in legend, but never as common as ale. Still, when it was brewed, mead transformed occasions into memories. A wedding feast might begin with the sharing of mead, its sweetness marking the start of a union. Some traditions even link the drink to fertility. The word honeymoon is believed to come from the custom of giving newlyweds a month's supply of honey wine, a hope that their marriage would be as sweet and fruitful as the drink itself. To this day, the phrase carries echoes of that medieval symbolism. In great halls, mead was poured into horns, goblets, or simple clay cups, each sip binding companions in shared ritual. To drink from the same vessel was to affirm loyalty and fellowship. In sagas and chronicles, the mead hall was more than a building. It was the heart of the community, a place where courage was celebrated, stories preserved, and bonds of trust renewed. The drink itself became a symbol of unity, linking the living with their ancestors and their gods. But mead was not only for warriors and nobles. In quieter corners of Europe, villagers brewed smaller, humbler versions, using whatever honey they could spare. These rustic meads, often less refined, still carried the same golden glow, reminding even the simplest households of life's sweetness. A sip by the hearth, on a cold winter night, was a reminder that the bees of summer had left their gift behind. The presence of mead also reveals something deeper about medieval imagination. Unlike ale, tied to toil and necessity, mead belonged to the realm of dreams. It was sung of in epic poetry, invoked in blessings, and cherished as a symbol of prosperity. Even today, when we think of knights and halls of Norse gods and Saxon lords, we imagine cups of mead glimmering in torchlight. It is the drink that lingers in the background of our cultural memory, sweeter and more mysterious than all the rest. And yet, as the centuries passed, mead slowly receded. The rise of sugar from distant colonies lessened the demand for honey as a sweetener. Hopped beer grew dominant, wine expanded with trade, and mead became less practical for everyday use. What was once revered slipped into rarity, remembered in songs and customs, but brewed less often. By the late Middle Ages, mead was no longer the drink of common tables, though it endured in tradition, a golden shadow of earlier times. Still, the legacy of mead is undeniable. It is the oldest of drinks, perhaps humanity's first experiment with fermentation, carrying within it the memory of wild bees and ancient fires. In medieval Europe, it stood as a bridge between survival and celebration, between earth and myth. To study it is to glimpse how people once dreamed of gods who shared their nectar, of poets inspired by a single sip, of lovers blessed with sweetness. So when we think of the strangest and most wonderful drinks of the medieval age, we must pause at mead. It was not strange in the sense of oddity, but strange in its rarity, its connection to worlds half real, half legendary. It glowed with the color of honey, and carried the fragrance of flowers, a liquid thread tying people to their past, their gods, and their hopes. Mead was not for every day. It was for moments when the ordinary lifted into the extraordinary, when the voice of the scold rose above the noise of the hall, when vows were sworn, when songs were sung, when joy overflowed. It was the drink of legends, and though centuries have passed, the legend still lives in every golden drop. When we think of medieval drinks, our minds may leap first to feasting halls, tankards of ale, or golden cups of mead. Yet beyond these celebratory beverages, there was another world of drinking, one that was quieter, more practical, and often tinged with hope, fear, or desperation. This was the realm of herbal tonics and medicinal brews, concoctions born from the belief that nature's plants held the secrets to health and healing. In an age when medicine was still bound to tradition and superstition, drinks were often viewed not only as nourishment, but also as cures. A carefully steeped cup could be a shield against plague, a balm for pain, or a remedy for sleeplessness. People drank with faith that the liquid carried within it the strength of the earth, the wisdom of herbs, and perhaps even the blessing of God. For many, the line between a drink and a potion was nearly invisible. Picture a small cottage at the edge of a medieval village. Smoke curls from its chimney. Inside, an old woman bends over a wooden table, scattered with roots, dried leaves, and small clay jars. She crushes mint with a stone pestle, mixes it into warm water, and whispers words passed down from her grandmother. Outside, a child waits, feverish, his mother clutching his hand. When she gives them the steaming cup, it is more than a drink, it is comfort, ritual, and the hope of healing. Herbal drinks took countless forms. One common example was tisane, an infusion of herbs steeped in hot water. Chamomile was used to calm nerves and ease sleep. Peppermint soothed stomach aches. Meadowsweet relieved fevers. Elderflower was believed to fight colds. These plants were gathered in fields, hedgerows, and forests, dried carefully, and stored for the seasons when illness crept into the household. For many medieval families, these simple herbal waters were the first defense against sickness. Then there were the stronger brews, medicinal wines and ales infused with herbs. Monks and apothecaries often prepared these, combining local plants with imported spices like cinnamon, nutmeg and ginger. These ingredients were costly, carried by long trade routes, but they were prized for their supposed healing powers. Wine steeped with rosemary might be prescribed for headaches, while ale mixed with sage was thought to sharpen the memory. In an era when few treatments were reliable, the warmth and flavor of these drinks provided both physical relief and psychological reassurance. The monasteries of medieval Europe played a central role in preserving and developing this tradition. Within their cloisters, monks studied texts of ancient medicine, copying recipes that blended Roman, Greek, and Arabic wisdom. They cultivated herb gardens where rows of lavender, fennel, and thyme grew in neat order. From these gardens came not only food for the table, but medicines for the sick. Visitors and pilgrims who sought healing were often given a cup of restorative tonic, brewed from the plants of the monastery's soil. In this way, monasteries became centers of both faith and herbal science. At the same time, village healers, sometimes called wise women, sometimes derided as witches, kept their own knowledge. Their drinks were often made with local plants, their recipes preserved not in books but in memory and practice. These healers were both respected and feared. A tonic that soothed a cough might bring gratitude, but if illness persisted, suspicion could fall upon the maker. Still, for many peasants, these local brews were the only medicines they would ever know. Beyond healing the body, herbal drinks were believed to affect the spirit. A cup of valerian root might calm the anxious mind, while St. John's wort was thought to ward off evil spirits. Some mixtures blurred the line between medicine and magic, brewed at certain moon phases, or with whispered incantations. In a world where unseen forces were believed to shape daily life, a cup of herbal brew was both shield and blessing, a way to drink in protection as much as health. Some recipes were startling to modern ears. One remedy for digestion involved ale mixed with wormwood, an herb so bitter it was said to drive away not only stomach ailments but also evil itself. Another tonic blended nettles and honey to purify the blood. Even animal ingredients sometimes appeared in these drinks, like powdered bone or crushed snails, believed to strengthen the body. Strange though they may seem today, these concoctions carried the weight of centuries of belief. What made these brews so central to medieval life was not only their supposed healing powers, but their accessibility. Unlike exotic wines or expensive spices, herbs could often be gathered freely from fields and woods. Every household could learn which plants helped soothe a fever, which eased childbirth, which softened a cough. Drinking these remedies was part of survival, a way to resist the constant threat of disease. Yet herbal tonics were not purely practical. They also carried ritual and comfort. To sip chamomile before sleep was not only medicine but a gesture of care, a moment of peace in uncertain times. To drink a warming spice wine at a monastery was to feel both physical relief and the reassurance of divine blessing. In this way, herbal brews were threads woven into the fabric of daily life, binding together health, hope, and community. We must also remember the sensory side of these drinks. Imagine the fragrance of rosemary steeping in warm wine, its sharp scent filling the air, or the sweetness of honey stirred into thyme tea, coating the throat with soothing warmth. The taste of these drinks lingered not only on the tongue but in memory, connecting families to the plants of their homeland, the traditions of their ancestors, and the rhythms of the seasons. Over time, some of these medieval remedies proved to have real medicinal value. Modern science has confirmed that chamomile can indeed aid sleep, that peppermint calms the stomach, that elderflower supports the immune system. Others, of course, were more symbolic than effective. Yet in the medieval world, the act of drinking itself carried healing power. The warmth of liquid, the reassurance of ritual, the belief that the body was being renewed from within. Herbal tonics also reveal something profound about medieval imagination, the belief that the natural world was alive with cures, waiting to be unlocked. Plants were not seen as ordinary, but as gifts, each leaf and root infused with purpose. To drink them was to enter into harmony with nature, to take part in a cycle of growth, decay, and renewal. As with so many medieval drinks, herbal brews remind us of the delicate balance between necessity and wonder. They were practical solutions in a world with limited medicine, but they were also symbols of faith in the unseen, in the healing touch of earth and spirit alike. When a mother handed her child a warm cup of mint tea, she was not only offering medicine, she was offering comfort, belief and love, and so though they may seem humble compared to mead or wine, these herbal tonics carried a quiet power. They kept families alive through winters, eased suffering, and wove moments of tenderness into daily struggle. They were health in a cup, a reminder that even in the harshest times, people sought healing, hope, and sweetness in the simplest of sips. When we think of distilled spirits today, whiskey, vodka, brandy, we imagine finely aged bottles, complex flavors, and centuries of refinement. But in the medieval world, distilled drinks were a strange curiosity, new and mysterious, often more feared than enjoyed. The art of distillation was not first intended for pleasure at all. It was born in the laboratories of alchemists and apothecaries, who believed that by heating and capturing vapors, one might unlock the hidden essence of matter. What began as an experiment with fire, water, and copper slowly transformed into the first fiery drinks of Europe. To enter this world, imagine a dimly lit workshop in the 12th century. On a heavy wooden bench rests an alembic still, an odd gleaming contraption of glass and metal. A fire burns low beneath a copper vessel. A hooded figure watches carefully as liquid begins to bubble, steam rising and condensing through winding tubes. What drips out the other end is clear and sharp. Unlike any wine or ale, it smells of fire itself, carrying a potency that seems unnatural. This was the beginning of what people later called aqua vitae, the water of life. The earliest distilled drinks were not intended for merrymaking, but for healing. Apothecaries believed that the concentrated strength of aqua vitae could preserve health, extend life, and ward off disease. Taken in small sips, it was prescribed for fevers, for digestion, even for melancholy. It was a liquid both feared and revered, strong enough to burn the throat, yet believed to carry the power of purification. In monasteries and universities, scholars studied this clear spirit with fascination, wondering if it might hold the key to alchemical transformation, or perhaps to immortality itself. The name water of life captures the paradox of these early spirits. To drink them was to feel both pain and renewal. The fiery liquid shocked the senses, warming the body instantly. Unlike the slow comfort of ale or wine, it was said to awaken the heart, to quicken the blood, to sharpen the mind. For people accustomed to mild drinks, the intensity of distilled spirits must have felt otherworldly. No wonder some whispered that this was not a drink for common folk, but a substance of mystery, halfway between medicine and magic. At first, aqua vitae was rare. Distillation required skill, special equipment, and knowledge found only in a few circles, alchemists, monks, and physicians. But gradually word spread, recipes for distilling wine into brandy, or ale into stronger drink, appeared in manuscripts. Each promised different effects: strength for the weak, warmth for the old, courage for the fearful. People began to experiment, mixing herbs and spices into the distilled liquid, creating potions that were part medicine, part luxury. The courts of kings and nobles soon discovered these strange drinks. In glittering halls, lords and ladies might be offered a tiny glass of aqua vitae as a novelty, a liquid said to carry vitality itself. Its rarity made it precious, and its intensity made it memorable. Guests would cough or gasp at the first burning sip, but then laugh, declaring themselves enlivened. In this way, distilled spirits began to step out of the realm of medicine and into the world of social pleasure. Yet for many, the power of these drinks remained unsettling. Stories circulated of people who drank too much and fell ill, their bodies unable to handle the strength. The sharp, almost violent nature of aqua vitae gave it an air of danger. Unlike beer or wine, which nourished as much as they intoxicated, these spirits seemed untamed, raw and unnatural. To some they were a gift from God, distilled purity. To others they were closer to poison, a test of mortal limits. In monasteries, monks debated whether such strong drinks were a blessing or a temptation. Some praised their medicinal uses, recording recipes for treating everything from toothaches to plague symptoms. Others warned against indulgence, fearing that such fiery liquids could inflame not only the body but the soul. The tension between medicine and vice would remain a theme in the story of spirits for centuries to come. By the later Middle Ages, distilled drinks had spread more widely across Europe. Italy, Spain, and France saw the rise of stronger wines turned into brandy. In the colder lands of Ireland and Scotland, monks experimented with distilling grain mash, creating what would later become whiskey. These early versions were rough, harsh, and unpredictable, but they carried the same allure: strength captured in liquid form, vitality in a cup. Imagine the scene of a medieval traveler arriving at a roadside inn. The night is cold, rain lashes against the wooden shutters, and the fire burns low in the hearth. The innkeeper offers him a small measure of clear spirit, distilled in the back room. The traveler sips and coughs, his chest burning, but warmth spreads through his body. In that moment he feels restored. To him this strange biting drink is indeed a kind of water of life. The cultural meaning of distilled spirits grew richer with time. For peasants it was rare and mysterious. For nobles it was exotic and luxurious. For physicians it was a tool of healing. For alchemists it was a symbol of transformation. Each sip carried not only physical heat, but also layers of meaning, spiritual, medical, and social. It was never just a drink, it was a mirror of medieval hopes and fears. Of course, as with all strong drink, excess brought problems. Even in the Middle Ages, warnings appeared about the dangers of overindulgence. Writers noted that too much aqua vitae could cloud the mind, weaken the body, and invite sin. This tension between healing and harm, between medicine and excess, foreshadowed the long and complicated history spirits would have in Europe. Yet despite fears, fascination endured. The act of distilling itself seemed almost magical, transforming base liquids into something pure, strong, and enduring. In a time when people searched for eternal life, for hidden truths, for mastery over nature, distilled spirits became symbols of that quest. They represented both triumph and temptation, both science and sorcery. By the dawn of the Renaissance, distillation had moved beyond secrecy. Manuals circulated, techniques improved, and what had once been the guarded knowledge of a few spread to many. Spirits would soon play a central role in both medicine and celebration, shaping culture for centuries. But in the medieval period, they remained curiosities, strange fiery waters that carried within them the promise of life, the sting of fire, and the mystery of transformation. In their first rough, uncertain form, distilled spirits were not yet the refined whiskies or brandies of later centuries. They were something more primal, more symbolic. They were the liquid edge of human curiosity, proof that people would risk discomfort and even danger in pursuit of vitality and wonder. When a medieval man or woman lifted a small cup of aqua vitae to their lips, they tasted not only a drink but the beginning of a new chapter in human history, a chapter where fire, water, and human imagination merged to create something entirely new. By the late Middle Ages, Europe had already seen centuries of brewing ale, fermenting wine, and experimenting with distillation. But something extraordinary was about to happen, an age of contact, trade, and curiosity that would forever change the drinking world. When distant civilizations began to connect through travel, conquest, and commerce, new flavors and unfamiliar concoctions entered European cups. Some of these were embraced with fascination, while others were met with suspicion or outright fear. In either case, every sip carried the story of two worlds colliding. To picture this transformation, imagine a bustling Mediterranean port in the 14th century. Ships from the east glide into the harbor, their sails heavy with salt, their hulls laden with spices, silks, and rare goods. Dockworkers haul crates filled with cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg, flavors unknown to most Europeans, but destined to revolutionize cooking and drink alike. Among the barrels of wine and amphorae of oil come stranger curiosities: syrups infused with sugarcane, fruit wines of exotic colors, and bitter tonics, brewed in lands far beyond Europe's horizon. One of the first great arrivals was sugar. Before sugar, sweetness in Europe came only from honey or fruits. But the introduction of sugarcane from the Islamic world brought an entirely new possibility for drinks. Physicians and apothecaries immediately seized upon it, mixing sugar into medicinal tonics, believing that sweetness balanced bitterness and made healing potions more palatable. Soon nobles demanded their wines and syrups laced with this luxurious ingredient. The ordinary person might never taste sugar in a lifetime, but for the wealthy, it transformed their tables. A simple cup of spiced wine, sweetened with sugar, became a symbol of privilege, indulgence, and sophistication. Equally transformative was the arrival of spices: cinnamon, ginger, cloves, cardamom. These were more than just flavorings, they were treasures. Spiced wines, sometimes called hippocras, became fashionable at feasts. To drink a goblet of wine, infused with cinnamon and sugar, was to taste the far reaches of the known world. The experience was not merely culinary, it was cultural. Every sip was a reminder that Europe was connected, however tenuously, to vast trade routes stretching across deserts and seas, linking it to India, Arabia, and beyond. But along with sweetness and spice came stranger liquids. From the Arab world came knowledge of sherbets, cool drinks made from fruit juices, herbs, and sugar. These refreshing concoctions fascinated Europeans, though few could replicate them with authenticity. From farther east, travelers returning from China and the Mongol Empire told stories of fermented beverages made from rice or even mare's milk. Marco Polo himself described the Mongols drinking kumis, a slightly alcoholic milk brew that struck Europeans as both bizarre and unsettling. The very idea of drinking fermented milk seemed unnatural to a people accustomed only to grape and grain. Other imports were equally baffling. In North Africa, palm wine was consumed, tapped fresh from the tree, and drunk while still fermenting. Sailors who encountered it described its sweet frothy taste and its fleeting freshness. It spoiled within hours. Such drinks carried with them not only foreign flavors, but also foreign customs. To taste palm wine was to step for a moment into the life of another culture, to share in rituals far removed from European norms. One of the most profound arrivals was coffee, though it would take until the Renaissance for it to truly take hold. In the medieval period, whispers of a dark, bitter beverage drunk by Muslims in Yemen and Ethiopia spread through Europe. Accounts spoke of a drink that stimulated wakefulness, keeping worshippers alert through long nights of prayer. The earliest Europeans to hear of it were intrigued, but also cautious. A drink that replaced sleep seemed unnatural, even dangerous. Yet the seeds of fascination were planted, waiting for centuries to bloom. Tea too hovered at the edges of medieval awareness. Chinese traders had long cultivated it, and whispers of its delicate, calming brew occasionally reached European ears. But in the Middle Ages, it remained more legend than reality, an exotic leaf spoken of in travelers' tales, a distant marvel that few would ever taste. For medieval Europeans, such accounts stirred imagination more than appetite, adding to the sense that the world was full of strange and wondrous drinks, just beyond reach. These imports did not always inspire delight. Many were greeted with suspicion. A drink too strange, too bitter, or too foreign could be dismissed as dangerous. Superstitions abounded. If a liquid did not resemble wine or ale, might it not be harmful to the body, or even the soul? Religious leaders sometimes warned against adopting foreign customs, fearing that strange drinks carried with them strange beliefs. Yet curiosity proved irresistible. The allure of the exotic was too powerful to ignore. Imagine a medieval banquet in a noble hall. The long table groans under platters of roasted meats and trenchers of bread. Servants bring forth goblets of spiced wine, shimmering with sugar crystals. Guests marvel at the warmth of cinnamon, the bite of ginger. Some whisper about the new syrups that have arrived from the Levant, sweet drinks flavored with roses, lemons or pomegranates. Each sip becomes a conversation, a chance to marvel at the reach of trade and the mysteries of distant lands. For the wealthy, to drink exotically was not only to indulge the senses, but also to display status. One's cup became a symbol of connection to a wider world. Meanwhile, among scholars and apothecaries, exotic drinks were studied with more serious intent. Physicians debated the medicinal value of spices and syrups. Could cinnamon wine aid digestion? Could ginger ale cure a chill? These questions were not idle curiosities. They shaped the very way Europeans understood health and wellness. Every new flavor was analyzed through the lens of the four humors, fitted into the medieval system of balancing hot, cold, wet, and dry. In this way, exotic imports were woven not only into banquets but into medicine, theory, and philosophy. But exotic drinks also carried shadows. The trade that brought sugar and spices to Europe was not innocent. Behind the sweetness of sugar lay the harsh reality of labor in distant fields, the exploitation of lands and peoples far away. Already in the medieval period, sugar plantations were being established in the Mediterranean islands under brutal conditions. Though few Europeans knew it, the taste of sugar in their wine carried with it the beginnings of a darker history that would expand in centuries to come. The collision of worlds in the medieval cup was therefore both enchanting and unsettling. On the one hand, new drinks offered joy, novelty, and prestige. On the other, they hinted at the vast unequal web of trade and conquest that underpinned their arrival. A sip of spiced wine might feel like luxury, but it also whispered of caravans crossing deserts, of sailors braving storms, of slaves laboring in distant fields. Every exotic drink carried with it the unseen weight of the world. For ordinary people, these imports remained distant luxuries. A peasant in a small village might never taste sugar, never smell cinnamon, never hear of coffee or tea. Their world was still bound to ale, cider, and water. But even they would have heard rumors of nobles feasting on drinks sweeter than honey, of distant lands where milk turned to wine, of strange black brews that kept men awake all night. These stories stirred imagination, adding a layer of wonder to a world otherwise familiar and local. In truth, the arrival of exotic drinks was less about taste and more about imagination. They expanded the horizons of medieval thought, reminding people that the world was larger, stranger, and richer than they could see. To hear of kumis palm wine or sherbet was to confront the limits of one's own culture, to glimpse possibilities beyond the ordinary. Even if most never drank them, these strange brews shaped medieval dreams of the exotic, fueling both curiosity and desire. By the end of the Middle Ages, Europe had begun to integrate these imports more fully. Spiced and sugared wines became staples of noble banquets. Apothecaries stocked syrups and exotic tonics. Travelers returned with stories of strange brews that blurred the line between myth and reality. The medieval cup, once filled only with ale, wine, or mead, had become a vessel of global encounter. Thus, when worlds collided, they did so not only on battlefields or in markets, but also in the quiet, intimate act of drinking. A sip carried across oceans and deserts. A swallow contained the labor of countless hands, the dreams of countless cultures. In this sense, the weirdest medieval drinks were not just those brewed from strange herbs or odd grains, but those infused with the strangeness of faraway lands. They were weird because they were unfamiliar, because they carried within them the mystery of the other. In every drop of exotic import, medieval Europeans tasted more than flavor. They tasted distance, difference, and the allure of the unknown. These drinks whispered of a world beyond their own, a world that was slowly, inexorably becoming part of theirs. And as they raised their cups, sweetened, spiced, or strange, they were not just drinking, they were participating in the first sip of globalization, centuries before the word existed. When we look at the drinks of the Middle Ages, they might seem distant, quaint, or even strange. Honeyed meads, spiced wines, fermented milk, herbal ales. These are not the beverages most of us casually order in modern cafes or bars. And yet, the legacy of those medieval drinks flows directly into the cups we hold today. The flavors we enjoy, the rituals we practice, and even the industries that shape our economies are deeply rooted in choices made hundreds of years ago. To explore this legacy is to realize that when you sip your morning coffee, your evening beer, or a glass of wine at dinner, you are tasting history. The most obvious echo lies in beer. In the Middle Ages, ale was the drink of the people, brewed in every village, and consumed daily by rich and poor alike. But medieval ale was different from the beer we know today. Early ales were unhopped, flavored instead with mixtures of herbs, known as brewed. These brews were earthy, often cloudy, and sometimes wildly inconsistent. The turning point came in the later Middle Ages, when hops, originally used in parts of Germany, spread across Europe. Hopped beer lasted longer, traveled farther, and tasted cleaner. By the 15th century, it had begun to replace traditional ale almost everywhere. That shift still defines our present. The beers most of us drink today, whether lagers, stouts, or IPAs, all descend from the hopped beer revolution. The very idea that beer should be bitter, refreshing, and stable traces directly back to medieval innovation. Even craft breweries that experiment with herbs or honey are consciously reviving techniques that once defined everyday medieval life. Every time someone takes pride in brewing a farmhouse ale or experimenting with Groot, they are, in essence, reaching back into the medieval past and giving it new life. Wine, too, carries a strong medieval legacy. The vineyards of France, Italy, and Spain that dominate today's global wine industry were already active in the Middle Ages. Monks carefully cultivated grapes, documenting their methods and passing knowledge through generations. The idea of terroir, that soil, climate, and geography give a wine its unique character, emerged in monastic writings. Medieval records from Burgundy or Champagne speak of subtle differences in taste, depending on where the grapes were grown. Today, entire industries revolve around those same distinctions. When a sommelier describes the earthy notes of a Bordeaux or the crisp minerality of a Chablis, they are echoing conversations that began centuries ago in cloisters and vineyards. Even the rituals surrounding wine are inherited. The medieval banquet, with its flowing cups of spiced and sugared wine, set the stage for wine as a marker of celebration, status, and refinement. Today, we still raise glasses at weddings, toast at feasts, and associate wine with sophistication. The liquid has changed. Few of us drink wine mixed with cinnamon and sugar anymore, but the symbolism remains strikingly similar. Another legacy lives in distilled spirits. Medieval alchemists experimented with distillation, not primarily for pleasure, but for medicine. They called the product aqua vitae, the water of life. At first it was consumed as a tonic, believed to restore health, preserve youth, or ward off disease. Over time, though, people discovered that these fiery liquids had uses beyond the apothecary. Brandy, whiskey, and other spirits all trace their roots to those first tentative distillations. Today, the global spirits industry, whether Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, French cognac, or Caribbean rum, exists because medieval experimenters tinkered with stills and flasks. Even the language we use preserves the past. Spirits reflects the old belief that distillation captured the very essence, or spirit of a substance. Each time someone enjoys a neat glass of brandy, or mixes a cocktail, they are participating in a tradition that began when medieval scholars peered into bubbling vessels, and marveled at the transformation of liquid into vapor, and vapor back into liquid. Beyond taste and production, the medieval legacy also survives in the role of drinks within society. In the Middle Ages, what one drank often revealed one's status. Nobles consumed wine and spiced concoctions, while peasants drank ale and cider. Monks brewed carefully measured batches, both for sustenance and for sale. Drinking was never just about quenching thirst, it was about identity, community, and even morality. That pattern continues. Today, the choice between craft beer, fine wine, artisanal coffee, or a simple soda still signals social identity. Cafes and pubs function as community spaces, much as taverns and alehouses did centuries ago. To meet a friend for a drink, to share stories over a glass, is to engage in a ritual as old as civilization itself. The medieval world did not invent communal drinking, but it did give Europe, and later the world, institutions like the tavern, the inn, and the public house. Modern bars and coffee shops are their direct descendants. Perhaps the most surprising medieval legacy is in the drinks that entered Europe from abroad and have since become global staples. Coffee, once whispered about as an exotic Muslim drink, is now a daily ritual for billions. Tea, once an unreachable Chinese marvel, is now the cornerstone of cultures from Britain to India. The medieval encounters with these beverages set the stage for their later adoption. When Europeans finally embraced coffee and tea in the Renaissance and beyond, They already had centuries of curiosity primed by earlier stories and encounters. Today's cafe culture owes as much to medieval imagination as to later colonial trade. Sugar too remained central. In the Middle Ages, it was rare and precious, reserved for the elite. But its introduction changed European tastes forever. Sweetened wines, candied fruits, and sugared syrups shaped how people thought drinks should taste. That craving for sweetness has only grown. Modern sodas, cocktails, and even sweet liqueurs are direct heirs to the medieval taste for sugar in the cup. Unfortunately, the darker legacy also persists. The medieval sugar trade foreshadowed the vast exploitative plantations of the modern era. Every can of soda or sweetened coffee still carries in its history the echoes of medieval sweetness entwined with human cost. The legacy is also medical. Medieval physicians debated endlessly about whether wine heated the body, whether ale cooled it, whether mead soothed or disturbed the humors. Their system of medicine may seem outdated, but the very idea that drinks could affect health lingers. Today, we still ask, is red wine good for the heart? Does beer add weight? Is coffee harmful or beneficial? Nutrition science has replaced the four humors, but the questions remain remarkably similar. The medieval instinct to connect what we drink with how we feel persists in every health article and dietary guideline. We also inherit medieval fears. In the Middle Ages, people worried about water. Contaminated streams and wells made water risky, so beer and ale became staples. Today, in many parts of the world, bottled water, filtered water, and debates over purity echo that same concern. The belief that drinking water might make you ill is no longer universal, but it shaped centuries of preference for fermented beverages. Even now, some cultures instinctively prefer beer or wine to water with meals, reflecting habits formed long ago when water was not to be trusted. Consider too the ceremonial and symbolic power of drinks. Medieval Christianity sanctified wine as the blood of Christ. Ale was tied to hospitality, with monasteries offering it freely to travelers. Mead appeared in marriage rituals and epic poetry. Drinks carried deep symbolic weight. In modern life, the symbolism remains. Champagne marks celebration. Coffee marks the start of the day. A shared beer can seal a friendship. A glass raised in toast unites people in purpose. These rituals are not accidents. They are inheritances shaped by centuries of meaning. On a more subtle level, the medieval legacy influences how we think about authenticity and craft. In the Middle Ages, brewing and winemaking were local, tied to family recipes and regional traditions. Industrialization would later change this, but the modern craft movement, microbreweries, natural wines, artisanal distilleries, is in many ways a return to medieval practice. Consumers seek drinks that feel rooted, authentic, tied to place and tradition. This longing echoes the medieval reality, where every village had its brewer, every monastery its vineyard, every household its recipe. The sense that drinks should carry a story, a history, a connection to land and people, that is medieval at its core. Even the weirdest medieval drinks leave their imprint. Fermented mare's milk may not be a staple in the West, but in Central Asia, it remains part of cultural identity, a reminder that diversity of drinks is as ancient as humanity. Herbal tonics, once dismissed as old-fashioned, find new life today in kombucha, infused teas, and health drinks. Palm wine still flows in parts of Africa, linking communities through ancient rituals. These drinks remind us that the medieval world was not only European, but global, and that the exchange of flavors and ideas continues. The echoes reach beyond taste, touching on philosophy. To drink in the Middle Ages was to engage with mystery. Fermentation was poorly understood, distillation even less so. People spoke of spirits, humors, and alchemy, trying to explain transformations that seemed magical. Today, science has explained yeast, alcohol, and chemical reactions. Yet the sense of mystery remains. People still speak of magic in brewing, still romanticize the transformation of grain and grape into something richer. The language of enchantment lingers, a medieval shadow in a scientific age. And so, when we step back, we see that our modern drinks are not merely products of industry or convenience. They are the living legacy of medieval choices, experiments, and encounters. Every beer carries the memory of monks in cloisters, refining hops. Every wine bottle echoes the vineyards of Burgundy, tended by medieval hands. Every spirit recalls an alchemist's flask bubbling in candlelight. Every sweetened soda reflects the first medieval taste of sugar, marveling at its luxury. Every cup of coffee whispers of medieval travelers, hearing strange tales of a dark, bitter brew in far-off lands. The legacy of medieval drinks is in the end not just about flavors or industries. It is about continuity. It is about the way small everyday choices, what to drink, how to flavor it, when to share it, can ripple across centuries, shaping cultures and habits long after their origins are forgotten. To sip a modern drink is to participate in a chain of history, stretching back through medieval feasts, monastic brewhouses, alchemical experiments, and global encounters. So the next time you raise a glass, pause for a moment, look at the liquid, consider its taste, and imagine the centuries behind it. Imagine the medieval peasant sipping ale at dawn, the monk carefully noting his vineyard's yield, the noble marveling at spiced wine, the traveler tasting palm wine for the first time. Their world is gone, but their choices live on in your cup. In this way, the legacy of medieval drinks continues to flow, one sip at a time, an unbroken stream from past to present. In the medieval imagination, drink was never just drink. Liquids carried meanings far beyond nourishment or pleasure. They were woven into rituals of faith, symbols of life and death, and vessels of superstition. In a world where every natural event hinted at the hand of God or the whisper of unseen forces, a cup of wine, a draught of ale, or a sip of some peculiar brew could take on deep significance. To understand how medieval people saw their beverages, one must step into a mindset where material and spiritual were inseparable, and where a simple drink might bind heaven and earth. Wine, above all, held the richest symbolism. Christianity had taken root in medieval Europe, and at its heart lay the sacrament of the Eucharist. Each Mass transformed wine into the blood of Christ, a mystery both sacred and awe-inspiring. To drink wine in this context was not to seek merriment, but to participate in divine sacrifice. The chalice at the altar was unlike any other cup, and the wine it held was more than a drink. It was salvation in liquid form. Even outside church walls, this sacred association gave wine a special dignity. To pour wine at a feast, or share it with honored guests, carried echoes of holy ritual, a shadow of the eternal banquet promised in Scripture. Ale and beer, though humbler, also carried spiritual weight. For peasants, these were not only daily staples, but symbols of community and life itself. To share ale at a table was to affirm bonds of fellowship. In taverns, monasteries, and village greens, the communal cup or pitcher became a sign of trust. Each person drinking from the same vessel joined in both nourishment and companionship. At weddings, special batches of ale were brewed, sometimes flavored with herbs thought to bless the union with fertility and fortune. Such drinks were not ordinary. They marked thresholds of life, moments when human joy and divine favor were believed to intertwine. Superstitions wrapped themselves tightly around medieval beverages. Herbs steeped in wine or ale were thought to ward off evil spirits or invite good luck. In some regions, people dropped iron nails into their drinking vessels to protect against witchcraft, believing that unseen curses could be carried by liquid. Certain brews were consumed only at particular times of year, aligned with the turning of seasons, when the veil between the natural and supernatural was thought to thin. To drink at midsummer, or on the eve of All Hallows, carried a weight of magic, as if one sipped not only ale, but also the mystery of time itself. Medicinal drinks blurred the line between science and superstition. A physician might prescribe a tonic of distilled herbs in wine, but the same liquid could be whispered over with charms, doubling its supposed power. In villages, wise women brewed concoctions said to protect infants from illness, or shield farmers' cattle from misfortune. Was the power in the herbs, in the alcohol, or in the prayers spoken as the mixture was stirred? For medieval people, there was no clear boundary. Drink, like the body itself, was a vessel through which both natural and supernatural forces flowed. Festivals gave drink its most theatrical symbolism. During harvest celebrations, overflowing mugs of ale represented abundance, gratitude for the earth's generosity. At Christmas, spiced wine or wassail carried hopes for warmth, renewal, and blessing in the coldest season. People would gather in circles, lifting cups high, chanting or singing as they drank together, believing that their voices and their toasts could influence the year ahead. To raise a glass was not simply to celebrate, but to act upon the world, to shape fortune with ritual. In more secretive circles, drink sometimes became part of darker practices. Medieval records, often written with suspicion, describe gatherings where potions were consumed to summon visions or commune with unseen spirits. Whether these accounts were truth, exaggeration, or fear-driven invention, they reveal how easily drink could be imagined as a bridge to other realms. Strong liquors, rare and fiery, were said to inspire strange dreams. Herbal mixtures might blur the line between intoxication and trance. In these contexts, drink was not pleasure, but gateway, a dangerous key to mysteries best left hidden. The symbolism of drink also extended into death and remembrance. At funerals, mourners often gathered to share ale, binding the living and the departed in one final feast. Certain brews were brewed only for wakes, their recipes carrying generations of tradition. To drink together was to honor the dead, to strengthen the community that remained, and to gesture toward the eternal communion of souls. In this way, even sorrow found expression in the language of drink. Not all symbols were lofty. Everyday superstitions clung to drinks in practical life. Some believed that spilling ale was a sign of bad luck, unless the spill was quickly wiped with bread and eaten, transforming waste into blessing. Others thought that the way bubbles rose in a mug could foretell weather. Large, fast bubbles meant storms. Slow, tight ones promised calm skies. Children were told that drinking the last drop in a cup would ensure their wishes came true. These small beliefs, woven into daily habits, show how thoroughly the act of drinking was bound with meaning. In monastic life, symbolism reached still further. Monks often brewed beer, not only for sustenance, but also as an act of devotion. Each stage of brewing could be framed as a meditation, the boiling of water as a purifying fire, the fermentation as a hidden work of God, the pouring of beer as the outpouring of divine grace. Though not every monk may have felt this way, the writings that survive reveal a mindset where even brewing and drinking became liturgy. The cup could be chalice, the drink could be prayer. Over time, these symbolic associations shaped identity. To drink certain beverages marked one's place in society. Nobles drank wine, often spiced or sweetened, echoing divine banquet and refined ritual. Peasants drank ale, earthy and communal, echoing fellowship and humble faith. Clergy drank both, but always with symbolic caution, mindful of the line between sacrament and indulgence. The very act of drinking reflected hierarchy, belief and worldview. Perhaps the most enduring symbol was that of transformation. To ferment grain into beer, or grapes into wine, seemed to mirror the transformations of life itself: birth, growth, death, renewal. To distill strong spirits was even more mysterious, a process that seemed to capture essence from matter, spirit from flesh. For medieval people who lived in a world saturated with metaphor, these processes were not merely chemical, but spiritual. To drink the result was to partake in mystery, to taste in liquid form the eternal truth that all matter changes, yet life endures. In all these ways, medieval drinks carried a depth of meaning modern eyes might overlook. They were medicine and magic, ritual and superstition, fellowship and faith. A single cup could be sacred or profane, a symbol of joy or a warning of sin. To raise a drink was to step into a web of meanings, to taste not only flavor, but also story, symbol, and spirit. And so when we picture a medieval tavern or feast hall, we must remember that the clinking of mugs was never just noise, and the pouring of ale was never just refreshment. Each act was layered with centuries of belief. For those who lived in that age, drink was indeed a spiritual tool, a way to touch the unseen, to mark the rhythms of life, and to bind together the human and the divine. As we reach the end of this journey through medieval cups, chalices and pitchers, we are left with an impression far deeper than mere curiosity. At first glance, the drinks of the Middle Ages might seem odd, even bizarre: birch sap, fermented mare's milk, wormwood ale, spiced wines thick with herbs, and countless concoctions brewed with ingredients we would never dream of consuming today. Yet behind every strange sip lay a story, a need, and a world alive with meaning. These beverages were never just about taste. They were mirrors of a culture, reflections of its fears, hopes, and beliefs. The legacy of medieval drinks lingers quietly in our modern world. Many of the beverages we take for granted, beer, wine, distilled spirits, owe their development to centuries of medieval trial and tradition. The humble ale, brewed in village cottages, evolved into the beers that now fill shelves across the globe. Monks, with their careful brewing and patient refinement, help preserve techniques that would later blossom into modern brewing science. Wines flavored with herbs and spices laid the foundation for mulled wines and festive holiday drinks we still cherish. Even the experiments with distillation, once mysterious and secretive, gave rise to the strong liquors that now populate bars and homes worldwide. But the legacy is more than technical, it is cultural and symbolic. When we raise a glass today, to celebrate, to honor, or simply to enjoy, we echo the rituals of our ancestors. The toast at a wedding, the communal drink at a holiday gathering, the pouring of a special bottle in memory of the departed, all these acts stretch back through centuries to medieval halls and sacred ceremonies. The vessels may have changed, the flavors may have evolved, but the human impulse remains the same: to mark life's moments with drink, to seal bonds with shared cups, to find meaning in what we consume together. Looking back, we see how deeply drink was tied to survival. In an age when clean water was uncertain, beer and ale provided safety. In cold winters, spiced wines gave warmth and comfort. Herbal tonics, however questionable by modern medicine, offered hope when other cures were scarce. To dismiss these drinks as merely strange is to overlook their necessity. They were lifelines as much as luxuries, practical as well as symbolic. They kept communities alive and gave people a sense of control over a world often unpredictable and harsh. At the same time, these drinks reveal the boundless creativity of the medieval imagination. People were unafraid to experiment, to ferment, to distill, to mix herbs with honey or milk with strange additions. Some of these experiments succeeded, leading to enduring traditions. Others vanished into obscurity, remembered only in scattered manuscripts or the whispers of folk memory. Yet all testify to a human spirit willing to innovate, to seek new flavors, and to push the boundaries of what could be consumed. There is also something humbling in how medieval people saw their drinks, not only as nourishment, but also as connection to each other, to nature, to God, and to forces unseen. A drink was never just liquid, it was symbol, ritual, medicine, and mystery. In their cups, they sought more than refreshment, they sought meaning. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. Today, when we enjoy a glass of wine, a mug of beer, or a cup of something warm by the fire, we rarely pause to think of its history. Yet every sip carries echoes of the past. Each flavor is layered with centuries of tradition. Each ritual of drinking, from the casual toast among friends to the solemn sharing of wine in churches, carries the weight of ages. To remember this is to see our own lives as part of a larger story, a story in which medieval people played their role with the same hopes and fears we carry now. And so, as we close this exploration of the weirdest drinks medieval people consumed, let us carry forward a new perspective. What once seemed strange now becomes a window into another world, one both distant and familiar. The people who lifted their mugs in smoky taverns, who sipped wine in candlelit chapels, who trusted in herbal brews to heal their children, they were not so different from us. They sought safety, joy, comfort, and connection. They found those things in drink, just as we do. The next time you hold a cup in your hand, imagine for a moment the long chain of history behind it. Imagine the monks in their breweries, the peasants at their festivals, the nobles at their banquets, and the physicians at their tables of herbs. Imagine the rituals, the superstitions, the laughter, and the prayers. Each sip, whether simple or elaborate, is a quiet inheritance from those who came before. And in that thought perhaps lies the true strange beauty of medieval drinks. They remind us that what seems odd at first glance often carries deeper truths. that every culture, no matter how distant in time, infuses even the simplest act with meaning, and that in something as ordinary as drink, we can discover the extraordinary, a bridge across centuries connecting our lives to theirs, our cups to theirs, our stories to theirs.